Good morning and welcome to the webinar. Today's topic is the best friends approach to dementia care. Thank you for joining us. These complimentary webinars are brought to you through a collaboration of sponsorship with O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, as well as Alzheimer's Orange County. My name is Lauren Weiss. I am the Education Services Manager here at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I will be your host today. Our sponsorships are providing these webinars to you as a service to the community on topics that are beneficial for anyone who cares for and works with older adults. We hope you find today's presentation informative and useful. Today, our presenter is going to be David Troxel. Before I introduce our presenter, I'll review what you need to know if you're interested in earning continuing education or CE credit for today's webinar. CE credit is available for RCFE administrators, licensed RNs and LVNs, LCSWs, LMFTs, LEPs, and LPCCs through CAMPT and the BBS. You must be online for the full 60 minutes. You must have access to both audio and visual on your computer. And please answer the poll questions immediately. This is proof of your active attendance. Lastly, you must complete the survey right away, and the survey will open up immediately as you log out from the webinar after the presentation has ended. Please be sure to submit the survey within 24 hours so that we can get the certificate sent out to you in a timely manner. A certificate of completion will be issued to you by email within 14 days of us receiving your completed survey, as long as the other CE requirements are also met. You can print the handout from the control. Just a couple of basics for everyone. Your mic and video will automatically be disabled. Type your questions into the chat box located in the Zoom toolbar. We will save questions for the presenter until after the presentation, and we will not be responding to any raised hands. So please ask a question in the chat box. So now I will hand it over to Patty to speak a little bit about David Troxel.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. We have a very, very robust class attendance today. My name is Patty Mouton, and I serve as Vice President at Alzheimer's Orange County. And for more than 25 years, David Troxel has been my guru, mentor, and really all things important in learning how to provide dementia care since I first read his book, The Best Friends Approach to Dementia Care, about 25 years ago. He has graciously shared his knowledge, his expertise, and his motivation, particularly when some of us have had some difficult cases to review with him. His resume is really impeccable and goes back so many years to when he was working in adult day healthcare with Virginia Bell and determined that we needed to have a different way of looking at, interacting with, and enhancing the quality of life for people with dementia. He's been a caregiver, an academician, an author, a speaker, and really and truly a chief motivator to help us all do the very best we can. He graciously is available to us for these webinars, and we are so appreciative. So I hope you all will enjoy the rich experience of learning from David Troxel. David.
Well, thank you very much, Patty, my good friend and colleague for so many years. And I've always felt that despite so many of us knowing that Alzheimer's and the other dementias, it's such a serious topic, such a heavy topic, but I think you meet the best people in this field, don't you, Patty? I mean, our colleagues, our friends, the families we've met, it's really extraordinary.
Yes.
For those of us who've been in this field a long time, how many true friends we've made and colleagues, and what a wonderful spirit everyone brings to their work. So thank you, Patty, for that very gracious. Now I've got to live up to your introduction. Thank you. Well, welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And I know we've got about well over 100 people here in the webinar, which is very exciting. And many of you, if not most of you, live in Orange County, California. But with the World Wide Web, we often will have people from Mexico or Europe on these calls. I'll mention, though, for the locals on the webinar that I was the director of the Santa Barbara Alzheimer's Association for 10 years, where I first met Patty. So I have a real affinity to the Central Coast and to Orange County and the whole coast. I have friends in OC, And I'm delighted to be with you, even if it is virtual today instead of in person. I live in Sacramento, so we are sweltering through the heat right now. So let me jump in and kind of tell you a bit about what I want to accomplish today. I'd like to share with you really mostly about how we bring out the best in people living with dementia, how all of us survive this enormously emotional, physical, and financial stress of caregiving. But I'd like to start off with a bit of good news that I think we are making tremendous progress when it comes to understanding this disease and in terms of our overall worldwide view of this disease and services. Where are we seeing some success these days? Well, first, I would say that understanding and acceptance of dementia has grown. I began my career at the University of Kentucky Alzheimer's Disease Research Center when it was just one of 10 federally funded centers in the whole country back in the 1980s. Now, that was before we had cell phones, before we had the internet. And I have to tell you that back then we would get phone calls from caregivers and we put together a packet of information to mail them, of course, about dementia. It was not unusual for people to say, David, that envelope you're mailing, does it have a return address on it that says Alzheimer's? Please send it in an unmarked envelope. People were so embarrassed or ashamed to be caring for someone with dementia. So I think we have to really, take a real bow of success that we actually have, I think, fought stigma. Of course, President Reagan tremendously advanced the cause when he announced his diagnosis. So we do understand that this is a disease, is not something to be ashamed of or to hide. In fact, we want people to be open and talk about the diagnosis, because then they can get services better. And of course, you'll find out that so many of your friends and neighbors have the same situation. Services have tremendously increased. Day centers, senior living communities. Certainly, the average physician is doing a much better job than they did 30, 40 years ago. So we can feel very good about services increasing and again, stigma falling away. And our field of knowledge continues to expand as enhanced research dollars support important studies. We are now, I think, forgive me for forgetting the numbers, something like $2.3 billion, maybe it's even over $3 billion when it comes to federal research on Alzheimer's disease. And it's very exciting that where there is money, there's progress. There are young people coming to this field to try to conquer this disease. We should feel very good about our research studies and recent drug approvals. We went almost 20 years, which is stunning, without a major approval. We had Aricept, Exelon, Razidine, Namenda. I'm sure all of you know those drugs, but we've had actually three approvals. One was withdrawn from the market, but we have Leqembi and also donanemab or Kisunia, these two new medications that actually are what we call DMTs. DMTs, disease modifying treatments, which is the first time we've actually had medications that do seem to impact the amyloid in the brain and actually change the course of illness, even though the current medications that have been approved are for very early stage people. And I have to say they're probably somewhat limited in what they're going to do for you, but I'm encouraged that they're the beginning of a whole new wave of approvals. Now, I'll mention to you a great resource for those of you who want to geek out a little bit and read more about research studies. Every year, Jeff Cummings, who's a wonderful, very renowned researcher in the field of Alzheimer's. He used to be the head of UCLA, and now he's at the UCLA Alzheimer's Center. Now he's at Cleveland Clinic in Las Vegas. He publishes an annual review of the research pipeline pretty much every spring. And the newest one said that as of January 1, 2024, there were actually 164 trials assessing 127 unique treatments for Alzheimer's disease. So I think we should feel very, very excited about this progress we're making. I believe it was something like 1/3 of those are in what we call phase 3 clinical trials being tested, hopefully safely on people. So we're going to see many more approvals going forward, I think. I will tell you there was a little bit of a negative wrinkle, so to speak, but actually this number of trials is down year over year. So it down subtly, which we don't quite know why, but the bottom line is there's a lot happening when it comes to progress around medication. We're also seeing some tremendous science and evidence coming together that lifestyle can make a difference. There's a saying that what's good for the heart is good for the head. And we are believing now that there are lifestyle steps that one can take that may help you get Alzheimer's disease later in life, or we hope maybe prevent it altogether. So I'm sure through your wonderful nonprofit, Patty and Lauren, that you often have these talks about healthy brains. But I'll just kind of do a quick note here and say that basically exercise is very, very powerful. Probably the most evidence-based thing, that people who exercise regularly may get Alzheimer's disease later in life than people who don't. So exercise twice a day, keep going. That's good for the brain, good for the body. Lifelong learning. A friend of mine who's a neuroscientist says we should all learn a new brain-rich skill every decade of our life, again, to help keep our neurons going. Socialization. I am very excited about this research that basically suggests that people who have friends, people who sing in the church choir, people who are engaged in life may get Alzheimer's disease later in life than the loners. Even people who are married or partnered might get Alzheimer's later in life than the single people. Now, don't fear if you're someone who's kind of a loner or not someone who's very social. These are all risk factors. I'm sure a few of you have heard of the late, great Winston Churchill, the famous wartime prime minister of England. Well, I think he drank heavily, he smoked heavily, he was obese, and yet I think he still lived well into his 90s. So these are risk factors, but particularly if you have parents with dementia, family members with dementia, particularly ones who got dementia at a younger age, again, this is something you want to be attending to. Good heart health, diabetes control, a healthy diet, the Mediterranean diet, rich in olive oil, seafood, vegetables, less red meat, less dairy, and sleep. I love when they say in public health, sleep hygiene, good sleep hygiene. For those of you who get a good night sleep, 8 hours, it can make a difference in somehow kind of flushing out the brain, to be very colloquial about it. That's one that I fall down on. I have to say, I probably am getting 6 to 7 hours sleep max. So I've got to work on that one as well. Now, again, I wanted to cover just a few kind of research updates and health updates and give you some ideas from the health perspective before I jump into how we create a therapeutic or healing environment for people living with forgetfulness or cognitive loss. And I love this slide here from Dr. Michael McLeod, who is recently retired geriatrician from UC Davis Alzheimer's Center. And Dr. McLeod says Alzheimer's disease and the other dementias, by definition, again, dementia is that broad umbrella term for lots of these illnesses and issues that can cause cognitive loss. Alzheimer's and dementia don't travel alone. And I think this is a really interesting concept that is powerful for any of you, particularly working in long-term care or healthcare, but for all of us as well. He says that Alzheimer's disease and these other dementias often come with other challenges that are actually treatable. But if we miss them, if we leave them untreated, it worsens impairment. So on the right is a good list of things to keep an eye out for, particularly if your mother, father, husband, wife, or partner, maybe they've been living by themselves. Many people with dementia live alone. Maybe you create that kind of wonderful pillbox for them with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Well, guess what? They probably are still taking their meds wrong. Taking too many, not enough, not at all, maybe taking over-the-counter things like Benadryl that aren't appropriate. So you definitely want to work with your pharmacist and clean up the medicine list and hopefully not have them on many drugs they don't need to be on. Alcohol abuse, people again become more disinhibited. They might start drinking. Stroke, depression, pain, malnutrition, hormone issues, thyroid issues, blood sugar, diabetes. There's some fascinating research out there now about people with long histories of not taking care of their diabetes. That might put them at greater risk for cognitive loss. Hearing, visual impairments, again, B12, D deficiency, sleep issues, the notorious urinary tract infection, UTIs that can cause a lot of chaos, and loneliness and isolation. So again, very, very powerful there to have that recognized by a physician like Dr. McLeod. Now, I want to mention depression and pain real quickly because they are very, very important. There's actually research dating back to 1952 that people with long histories of untreated clinical depression are at greater risk for cognitive loss later in life. And the Alzheimer's Association, if you check their national website, they suggest that 40% of people with Alzheimer's disease will experience a round of depression during their course of illness. So depression is something we want to pay attention to. If you Google depression screens, there's actually screens or little paper tests you can take at home or use at home with your family member to see if you think they're depressed. If they are depressed, you want to treat it. How do we treat it? Well, with a wonderful day program, with activities, with engagement, with pet therapy, with sunshine, with purpose. It also can be treated with the antidepressant medications, which actually aren't too bad in elders. So do treat depression where you suspect it. Pain. Sadly, there's a lot of evidence out there that pain, particularly in later stages of dementia, goes unrecognized by professional and family caregivers. Now, when we think about it, if I develop a bad toothache, I can assess it, I can sort of diagnose what's going on, and I can call my dentist and say, hey, I have swelling, I may need to have an emergency root canal or something, and try to find a dentist very quick. But you see, when someone has cognitive loss, if they have Alzheimer's disease, they may experience the pain, but not be able to act on that knowledge. So instead, what happens to any of us when we're in severe pain? Well, you kind of begin to shut down. You don't eat, you don't socialize, you don't want to go out and do things. You may get kind of testy and maybe slap your caregiver. So again, be aware that pain is a significant issue. And again, if you go online on some pain scales, there's one called Pain AD. There's some scales that any caregiver, you don't have to be trained, any caregiver can look at some of these scales and actually assess what's happening with your family member and see if you suspect pain. But of course, a lot of these things, you kind of know it when you see it. So that can be something very, very important. My mother passed away with Alzheimer's in 2008, and her neurologist in Santa Barbara, Bob Harbaugh, a wonderful neurologist, he said something that really stayed with me. He said, Alzheimer's disease, David, is like a slow and lazy river. So be aware, for those of you who are family members or work in long-term care, that sudden changes don't mean that someone went into, stage 7B of Alzheimer's last night. What it means is they're ill, something's going on. So be aware of sudden changes because the person may not always be able to tell you what is happening. So with that, I think I'm going to just kind of put things to rest in terms of some of our healthcare discussions. We're going to try to build in some good time for discussion here. So we'll have some time for Q&A. But I will turn it back over to our wonderful host, who's going to put together a poll question for you.
Okay, so for our first poll question, Alzheimer's disease often comes with other challenges. True or false? Please answer quickly. If you're unable to answer via the poll question, please put your answer into the chat box. Again, Alzheimer's disease often comes with other challenges. True or false? I'll give it about 10 more seconds. It looks like everybody's had a chance to answer.
Well, what a talented audience, 100% correct.
Yes, perfect.
Almost at the moment.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll hand it back over to you, David.
Thanks, Lauren. Great. Whoops. Let's see. Stop sharing. I think that's right. Let me close this guy here. All right, perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So now let's kind of begin to discuss, what now? You maybe you're doing everything right medically. Your mother or father has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What do we want to do? Well, years ago, when I started off my career in Kentucky, as Patty was saying, we didn't really know what to do with people with dementia. There was, a sort of sense like, well, how do we keep them happy and how do we prevent dementia-related behavior? And my dear friend, Virginia Bell, who I've written my books with, who sadly passed, well, I don't even know if I'd say sadly, she passed away at 101 recently, and lived a wonderful life. Was working and writing until the last couple of weeks of her life. She and I met at the University of Kentucky. She founded one of the first adult day centers in the country, and we were the fledgling Alzheimer's Research Center there. And we started this day center with volunteers in the 1980s. And we began to notice that as people came to this adult day center, which was very focused on activities, music, art, dance, good food, ice cream cones, we had tremendous volunteers, and we almost had a one-to-one staffing ratio at this sort of teaching learning center. We noticed that people would come to the day center and their families would say, oh, mother won't do this, mother can't do this, oh, mother's impossible. And they would come to the day program and they would have a delightful day. somehow things would go well. And so that was sort of our light bulb moment, as I think Oprah would say, a light bulb moment that environment does matter and the approach does matter. And our volunteers back then were called best friends, and they would work one-on-one with one of the day center participants. And we soon discovered again that when we talked about friendship, many of the people with dementia kind of breathed it in like oxygen. Somehow there was something about this person-centered approach, this relationship-centered approach that made a big difference. So when we think about friends, if I went out with Patty, and Patty, wish we were together right now, but if Patty and I were having coffee at Starbucks, and I said to her, Patty, please forgive me, but I do have kind of a migraine coming on. I'm not at my best. And maybe Patty noticed that I wasn't very engaged in conversation, that maybe I was a bit snippy to the barista behind the counter, that I was kind of in a grumpy space. Well, I don't think Patty would take offense and storm out of Starbucks. I think she would say, well, David's usually a pretty nice guy, but he has a migraine, and so I can see why he's not doing well. So this analogy I'm trying to create is that you see we're friends, and she kind of walks a mile in my shoes, understand what's happening. So this idea that friends, if I had a migraine, or maybe I had some other issue, maybe I just gotten fired from my job or something. You see, Patty as my friend would be empathetic. She'd understand what's going on. She would demonstrate affection and warmth. Maybe I'm down in the dumps, because I've been fired. And she would say, you know what? Things are going to be fine. You have such a great network. You're going to get an even better job. Encouragement, affection, warmth. You see, friends know a lot about each other. So maybe she knows that I really do like chocolate. So perhaps she's going to order me, after we've talked a bit, a huge chocolate frappuccino with lots of whipped cream to kind of cheer me up. Friends communicate. They text, they talk, they visit. And of course, that's very, very important. And friends do things together. So we wrote this very first book that came out in 1995, hard to believe, called The Best Friends Approach to Alzheimer's Care. This is the second edition here. And we basically said that what someone living with dementia needs as a friend is someone who would be there for them, kind of recast, rethink the relationship, and focus on empathy, affection, warmth, knowing the life story, communication, and activities, because friends do things together. And when it comes to dementia care, let me tell you this right now, boredom is the enemy. When you don't have anything going on, I think that causes a lot of challenges. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But again, if you have an in-home caregiver, if you're involved in care yourself, if you work in a memory care neighborhood, you want to make sure that there's a really robust and good level of activities. And we put together in our book that when you kind of rethink your approach, when mother says President Obama's doing a great job, and you say, Mom, I like him too, instead of what's wrong with you? He's not the president. When you kind of let go of the little stuff, when you are able to learn not to argue or correct, I think you develop something called caregiving knack, Knack, which we define in our books as the art of doing difficult things with ease. So I'll sort of build my case for all of this. But again, what's exciting to me is when we wrote our very first book, it was pretty much based on just hundreds and thousands of hours of time spent with people with dementia and their family members, but we didn't have much of an evidence base. But now more and more, there's a strong evidence base that I like to say the brain loves company, that more and more studies suggest socialization can improve memory and longevity as it reduces stress and isolation. So this best friends approach in many ways is socialization therapy. So again, how can we support a friend who was recently fired from his job? How can we support someone with dementia, experience sadness and loss? I think it's kind of the same thing. If Patty's kind to me at Starbucks and I'm distraught because I've been fired at my job or something's gone on, and she's warm and empathetic and asks me questions and gets me my favorite beverage, in some ways, for those of you who work in senior living, imagine you have an 85-year-old gentleman living in memory care, and he's in the hallway by himself, and maybe tears are rolling down his cheek. What do? Well, we go up to him and say, hey, George, it's your friend David. What's happening? And maybe George says, oh, my son never visits me. Well, maybe the son was there that morning. He just forgot. Well, you see, I might say to George, George, I'd like to be your friend today. Let's sit and talk. And perhaps you say, that son of yours, I bet that rascal's playing golf today, but he's a pretty good kid. Do you want me to give him a talking to and tell him he needs to visit his father a little bit more often? In other words, talk and cheer and visit. And maybe I lift something up from George's life story. George, as a physician, you won the Doctor of the Year 3 times in Orange County. That is such an achievement. and your son went into medicine. You know, you are a terrific dad. I'm sure your son appreciates you so much. And you see, maybe then George is feeling a bit better. Then I get him his favorite strawberry ice cream. Maybe then we walk down the hall and join an activity. What I'm trying to put out that to you is that in many ways, the approach we take to our friends who are having a bad time is the same as we would to a person living with dementia. So a few kind of elements of the work that I've done, just to give you a flavor, and then we'll give you kind of a little bit of a toolkit to practice. Basically, Virginia and I, one of our proudest achievements is we were some of the first people in the world to write about dementia care in the context of human rights. And we published an article I think in the early 90s, called an Alzheimer's Disease Bill of Rights that was widely adopted internationally. We've since revised it, but I wanted to just share this with you, and it is available as a download from our website, or if you just Google Alzheimer's Bill of Rights, I'm sure you can find a copy. But basically, we say that everyone diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease or other dementia deserves to be informed of one's diagnosis, to have appropriate ongoing medical care, to be treated as an adult, listened to, and afforded respect for one's feelings and point of view, to be with individuals who know one's life story, including cultural and spiritual traditions, to experience meaningful engagement throughout the day, to live in a safe and stimulating environment, to be outdoors, to be free from psychotropic meds, to have welcome physical contact, including hugging, caressing, to be an advocate for oneself and others, to be part of a local, global, or online community. Many people are living in community with dementia, and to have care partners well trained in dementia care. So I want to just give you this. We won't take a lot of time on it. It's not like I'm preaching you must do every single thing on this list, but it's a wonderful statement of values. And for those of you who are providers, pardon me, for those of you who are providers, again, there's copies on my website. You're welcome to download, share with your team members, et cetera, because you can see that some providers, like here in San Francisco at Sequoia Living, they actually printed this Bill of Rights and had the staff all sign the matting to show their commitment to great care for people living with dementia. So I've mentioned this whole kind of life story piece, and I'll just say to you as family members, since I know a lot of family members on the call here, obviously many of you, most of you know your family member pretty well, but I'd like you to consider even putting together a one pager about some highlights about your family member. You know, what are some early favorite memories they have? Spirituality, religion notes, favorite foods, awards and accomplishments. People tend to remember those. You know, was your father the teacher of the year? Did he win a sports award or a military honor? I love knowing those so I can actually talk to people about them and share some of their past success. Their morning rituals. What do they drink for coffee? How do they take it? Conversation starters. Tell me about the time when you were 13 and you ran away from home and you walked across the Brooklyn Bridge all by yourself. You know, things that might spark some fun memories. Their preferred name and title. Do they want to be Dr. Johnston or George, or, you know, or maybe they have a nickname, Georgie? And favorite old sayings or stories. Now, for those of you who work in senior living, I'm a big fan of creating like a little top 10 card that can go in someone's shadow box by their door or on a dresser. For those of you who are family members, if your person with dementia ever needs to go to the ER, or you have an in-home caregiver, these kind of little social points can make a huge, huge difference. And I'll just give a simple example. I think Patty's seen this slide over the years. This is my mother, Dorothy, who my mom and dad lived in Paris in the 1950s. And my mother later developed Alzheimer's. She was Canadian, but her parents were British. And my mom had a long held tradition of afternoon tea. And her favorite tea was Earl Grey tea with milk. And let me tell you, when she later lived in memory care for 3 years, you know, we taught the staff about this ritual. And when she was having a bad day, if the staff would say, Dorothy, you haven't seen your son for a week. And of course, maybe I'd been there the day before. Dorothy, how about I pour you a lovely cup of Earl Grey tea with milk, just the way you like it? Ah, heaven. And let me tell you, this worked 97% of the time, because I think my mother felt like, I know them and they know me. And I think that's very affirming and encouraging, and helped her feel safe, secure, and valued. So sometimes this life story piece can be incredibly valuable and make a very nice connection. I wanted to kind of introduce you as we think about, again, activities and engagement and how we bring out the best in people with dementia. introduce you to a dear friend of mine who is no longer with us, but I met her when I was the director of the Alzheimer's Association in Santa Barbara, Daphne Gormley. She was a member of our early stage, younger onset Alzheimer's support group. And Daphne had been a brilliant woman. She'd worked for NASA and the Hubble Space Telescope, optician and engineer. She was ambitious, motivated, academic, specialized in optics and engineering. And she began making subtle mistakes at work. I can make a subtle mistake and probably people won't notice, but if you're building bridges or satellites, the smallest mistake by your engineering colleagues can be found out. So they sent her to get an evaluation, and she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 51. Now, I think for me, I would have been devastated to kind of have my whole career end at 51. But Daphne was always such a positive soul and kind of, glasses half full. And she said, despite this terrible blow, I think I'm going to focus on something I've always loved and not had enough time to do and go back to art. So she began painting. And she said, one of the benefits of my art for me is that it provides me a way of communicating without words. The colors I use are colors I find to be joyous. This is a way for me to express my joy in painting and in my life. Alzheimer's has taught me to concentrate on the things I can do, not on the things I can no longer do. So I was very, very impressed by that. And here is one of her wonderful pictures where, again, living in Santa Barbara, she did this sort of, lighthouse. I don't think it really existed. But what's so interesting is she said, David, on the left is me before Alzheimer's, on the right is me after, and this idea that she kind of wanted to put her feelings into life and into art. If we had time, I'd love to engage in a long discussion about this painting, but I know we don't really have the time in this webinar format. But I'll just share with you that when I've talked to people about this slide, it's art, so everyone has their own interpretation. On the left, some people sort of see safety and comfort and order and organization. On the right, sometimes people see a bit of chaos. But Daphne actually meant this painting to be humorous and positive. She said, David, my spice rack used to be alphabetized. And you see here on the right side with her living with Alzheimer's was her way of kind of celebrating the sun and kind of sort of being more in the moment. She even painted religious art. Pardon me, she painted religious art. She'd been raised a Catholic, but left the church, but later in life began painting saints, I think maybe with that spiritual connection. And of course, religions have rituals. So if you've as a child, said certain, religious songs or hymns or prayers or, the rosary beads, all of those stay with you. She even painted the plaques and tangles in her brain, the markers of Alzheimer's. So I'm mentioning this because, more and more we are seeing younger people, early onset people, these new medications that are coming out are really designed for people early in the illness. So we'll be diagnosing people much earlier through biomarkers and other methods, genetic testing. So I think we have to recognize that people living with dementia, we want to give them purpose and value and create an interesting day for them and to listen to them as they describe their feelings. So as we begin to wind down a little bit, I thought I would share a bit about communication, give you a few tips there, talk a bit about activities. I'm racing through my presentation. I probably have a bit too much because I want to leave time for Q&A, but I'll mention that sadly, communication centers are typically damaged by dementia. A couple of common issues: aphasia, a comprehension and communication disorder impacting reading, speaking, and writing. There's a diagnosis of PPA, primary progressive aphasia, where the person loses a lot of their communication skills first, and then the dementia happens or the confusion. Agnosia, the inability to recognize objects. They might see a coffee cup and think it's a hat. Apraxia, the brain's inability to direct body movement, for example, directing the arm through a sleeve. So a few things going there. I wonder, with all the research going on about medications, if someday they might, wouldn't it be wonderful if it could develop a medication that might somehow protect the language centers of the brain? That'd be very, very important. So Lauren, I'll have you handle our poll question number 2. Thank you very much. I think some of these are related to the CEs you all are earning.
Okay, our poll question number 2. Dementia solely disables the communication centers of the brain. True or false? Go ahead and quickly answer. If you're unable to answer via the poll, please put your answer into the chat box. Again, dementia solely disables the communication centers of the brain. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay, seems everybody's had a chance to answer. So wonderful. Mostly everybody got it correct. I'll hand
All
it back
right.
over to you.
Thank you. I think we either need to have tougher questions because the audience is very smart, obviously. They're all doing very well. All right. So here's just a few communication do's and don'ts that I think are very valuable. I think not necessarily in order of importance, but it is okay to help someone fill in the blanks if they're saying, my son, my son, my son. Oh, David. Yes, David. Give lots of compliments. This is something I do a lot of teaching about with our staff. It's very important to say, Dorothy, you look so beautiful in that pretty pink sweater today, or Dad, I'm so proud of your accomplishments, or you always, you always have the best golf game or whatever. And this maybe seem a bit weird for family members, say, why is David saying I should give lots of compliments to my father or mother? Well, you see, people with dementia, particularly early on, I think they understand their losses. They may recognize that they can't do the things they've always done, giving up their cars, giving up their ability to handle their own money, maybe moving into senior living. So I think we want to recognize that self-esteem can be damaged. And by giving compliments, particularly authentic ones, they can really lift the person up. Asking for an opinion. I used to bring shirts and neckties to my mom when she was living in senior living and say, Mom, I've got a busy week at work this week. You're so good at this. Would you help me match my shirts and ties? So this idea of asking someone for their opinion, do you like my beard or my goatee, or should I get rid of it? When you ask somebody their opinion, it means you value them. So it's a little trick I've developed that I think is very powerful. I will warn you, though, they do tell you the truth. They do tell you what they think. Take the blame. With my mom, one time I visited her in senior living, and she was always so pleasantly confused and sweet. We were very lucky, my father and I. But one time I got there and she was mad, and she said, "You're late, you're late, you're late. I've been waiting for you for hours." Now, I wasn't late. I always went around dinner time to help her. And I almost kind of went to the dark side and started saying, Mom, I'm really hurt that you're so mad at me. I'm not late. I always come at dinner. Don't you remember? Or something, terrible like that. But you see, I tried to use the knack, Knack, the art of doing difficult things with ease. Mom, the traffic was so terrible. I'm so sorry I'm late. I'll do better next time. I love you. So again, this idea of falling on the sword a little bit, trying not to argue, correct, confront, again, as we mentioned earlier, letting go of little stuff. I will say, my views have evolved. And I think if my mother, for example, talked about President Eisenhower, I might actually, gently correct her and say, "Oh, Mom, I know you loved him, but we have a new president, and here's his name." I think it's okay. Or, "Hey, I'm your son, David. I'm not, your son, Mark." I think it's okay to gently correct here and there. But if they get stuck on it, again, you might want to just sort of let go and accept what's happening. Try not to ask a lot of questions they can't answer. I was at my mother-in-law's in memory care right now, so it continues all the journey we're on. I was at my mother-in-law's building, and I overheard a daughter come in, and she said, "Hey, Mom, it's me. Do you remember my name?" Now, again, I kind of cringed because you see, the mother might remember it, and that's okay, I guess. But you see, if the mother doesn't remember her name, I think it can be very defeating because, see, people with dementia, even when they forget things, they still have the present moment. They still know they should know. So if you ask someone a lot of questions and they can't answer, I think that really feeds their negative self-esteem and can create some behaviors as well. And then the life story work, as I mentioned, I try to weave it in throughout the day to really connect them to their past and their achievements. Mom, it's so good to see you. Tell me more about your life in Paris, France, and the time you went to the embassy dinner. Oh my goodness, and you met some movie stars. You were really high society in Paris, or things like that. Just you can do. Or Mom, I have your Earl Grey tea milk ready to go. Things like that, kind of almost like throwing confetti, to use that life story work throughout the day. And when it comes right down to it, this is a quote that's been very powerful for me, particularly when I train staff. Sometimes I'll train staff in a community, because I work as a long-term care, dementia care consultant these days. And sometimes staff can be a little stuck in their ways and maybe not so welcoming to someone new coming in to telling them what to do. But when I say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. This wonderful quote from Maya Angelou that wasn't certainly written about Alzheimer's, but is so perfect. I tell you, I've seen some of even kind of some colder hearts melt, and people recognizing that that emotional communication, that nonverbal communication becomes very, very powerful when it comes to talking to our families or our residents or clients with dementia. Again, I kind of have the kitchen sink here, just a couple quick points about dementia related behavior. Sadly, you can often have some very challenging behaviors, people wanting to leave, exit seek, sexuality, people refusing personal care, refusing showers. I think a couple of thoughts I have here, and there's some great research on the web, Mayo Clinic, I'm sure the Orange County, group has some great materials as well that they've developed. But basically, one thing I like to suggest is there's not a one cure-all situation for behavior. Virginia Bell and I think, are some of the first people to write down that if you've met one person with dementia, you've kind of just met one person with dementia. Everyone has their own unique strengths and talents, and dementia seems to hit the brain differently, even when people have the same diagnosis from the same physician, Mayo Clinic or Irvine, UCLA. There's some people who seem to retain better memory than others or better communication than others. Everyone's a bit different. So you want to individualize your approaches to care management, to behavioral management, focus on remaining interests and skills. If there are things they still can do, maybe they've lost the ability to do 80 things, but they still love music and playing the piano a little bit. They love the happy hour or sitting outside. They love animals. You want to double down on things they still can do. And when things go wrong, when you're hurt, when you're feeling frustrated, when maybe someone says something mean to you, always remember it's the disease, not the person. So with behaviors, if something happens, look for triggers, look for patterns, time of day. Is it a particular caregiver? Maybe a bunch of children had been by, or grandchildren, and that was overstimulating. Look to the life story, social history for clues and cues. We had a woman at an assisted living building who kept taking things from the common area and taking them into her room and kind of hoarding things. We discovered she'd been a missionary, I think, in China, and had always been trying to save things for the children. And maybe that was what she was trying to do. It can kind of help us figure things out. Be sure the person isn't ill, depressed, in pain, and develop a common script or approach. If every family member is saying something different or every staff member is saying something different, it doesn't help. One of my favorite lines, by the way, I don't think I have a slide on it, but when someone newly moves into memory care, a friend of mine gave me this line a while back, which I love because it's very authentic. If mom says, I want to go home, I want to go home, you say, Mom, the doctor wants you to be here for now. You need to build your strength. The doctor wants you to be here for now. You need to build your strength. I think it's a great line to kind of, again, settle them in. Hopefully they begin thinking about this almost as a rehab visit. And of course, with assisted living memory care, we're hopeful that they, like my mother, end up, feeling good there, feeling that it's home, making friends, and that it ends up being a therapeutic, healing environment. I think this may be our last poll question, Lauren. Back to you.
Yes, our final question. Dementia symptoms are the same for everyone, true or false? So again, quickly answer or put it in the chat box. Dementia symptoms are the same for everyone, true or false? I'll give it a quick couple more seconds. Still got some answers rolling in. Okay, perfect. We'll go ahead.
So
Wonderful.
again, certainly there are some commonalities, obviously with dementia symptoms, short-term forgetfulness, communication issues, personality change, judgment, poor judgment. But thank you all for getting the spirit of my talk, that everyone is a bit of a unique individual. So it is, I would say, largely the false that they're the same for everybody. So well done once again. So again, a few quick things before we ran out of time here. Again, with behaviors, I decided to share with you one from my days in Santa Barbara. We had a gentleman who kind of woke up one day. He was living at home with his wife in a ritzy neighborhood some of you may have heard of called Montecito. And he developed a delusion, which is defined as a fixed false idea, that the neighbors had moved the fence in, 4, 5, 6 feet overnight to steal his land. Now, of course, it wasn't true, and we don't know where these things come from. The wife argued with him, showed him that there's been no movement of earth, whatever, the fence was old, but he was very convinced. And the more she argued with him, the more he began to think that she was in on it, right? So again, The famous Albert Einstein quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." She began to understand that this delusion was profound, that he believed it. So she kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt. She said, "Honey, I'm so upset that the neighbors might have done this. My goodness, let's look into it." And she, would say to him, "Honey, I'm calling the city. We're working on this." She actually, had enough money. She hired a team to come out to survey the land. She said to them, "I don't need your report. I just want you to send a couple guys and stomp around the backyard in orange vests for an hour." Because after all, if she'd given him the report, he would have thought they're in on it too. And by kind of placating him, letting him know we're working on it, by giving him the benefit of the doubt, what happened one day? Poof, the delusion went away. So you see, sometimes we have to wait these things out, be patient, be supportive. As a caregiver, it's so important to try not to become the bad guy. If I believe something very powerfully and someone keeps saying, no, 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 that's not true, that isn't it, right? I begin to develop kind of anxiety or maybe a bit of paranoia. But you see, when we're upset about something, we want someone to be on our side. So that's very important, I think, as well. So again, as we recap, we know how to deliver excellent care, keep the person as physically healthy as you can, get education for families and professionals, create this therapeutic environment, and then activities. Create a day filled with music, art, exercise, good food, outdoor time, and if you're working in this industry, staff that smiles and show affection. So real quick, what you're seeing here is a highly technical slide, not really, on what we do to help people living with dementia. Again, using their life story, laughter, nonverbal communication, giving them purposeful chores, asking mom to help you wipe off the table, fold towels. A friend of mine has his father stack poker chips by the color that he's accidentally spilled. Again, activity, conversation, exercise, children, animals, being outdoors. You all are in one of the most beautiful places in the world in OC, and get them outside for natural sunshine. Learning and growth. I love, with my mother, I'd go online and in 15 minutes could do a little class on Paris, France, and French vocabulary and French music and show her scenes. I love doing little classes for them because I think everybody still enjoys the experience of learning, even if they forget about it a few minutes later. So these are all things that are very, very powerful. I'll do a particular shout out to music. It turns out that music and song lyrics live in a different part of the brain than words and language. And so music and rhythm actually survive longer for people with dementia. I love this quote from Oliver Sacks, one of my professional heroes. He wrote a beautiful book called Musicophilia about the brain and music. Music can lift us out of depression or move us to tears, but for many of my neurological patients, music is even more. It can provide access, even when no medication can, to movement, to speech, to life. For them, music is not a luxury, but a necessity. So again, I want to wish you all good knack as you go forward to develop some of these ideas and clever tricks and strategies for working with a person, common sense, flexibility, patience, humor. I was at my mother-in-law's building. I saw one of the servers bring, like a ham and cheese sandwich. And the woman said, "I didn't order that." Well, I guess she had. But instead of arguing with her, the server said, I'll just say, Jill, I'm so sorry I got the order wrong. What would you like?" And brought back something else. Now, he also told me when I talked to him about it, the server, he said, "Oh, well, sometimes I just bring back the same sandwich 5 or 10 minutes later." And she said, what took you so long? I'm hungry." So again, this idea of having this knack of good care. Patricia was a client at our day center. She made audible noises. She had damage to her brain and would, kind of cry out a lot. Well, we looked at her life story. She was a church lady, a Southern Baptist. She also was an artist, a folk artist. She loved doing beautiful drawings. So we created an art station for her art. We also got her headphones for her Christian music. And when she was listening to her music or doing art, no vocalization. So again, there are ways we can begin to kind of build a successful day for people with dementia. My final couple of slides here, I think I'm almost on my mark here, so we can have some time for Q&A. A dear friend of mine, Dr. Nori Graham, who founded Alzheimer's Disease International in London, ADI, I recommend them if you want to Google them, Alzheimer's Disease International. They do an annual world report on Alzheimer's. It's terrific. Nori's a geriatric psychiatrist, and she says, maybe we make it more difficult than it needs to be. Maybe great dementia care is all about informed love. Another hero that I know Patty is very familiar with, Dr. Tom Kitwood, who did a lot of important research on caregiving in the 80s and 90s. He said, caregivers are physicians of the human spirit. Dr. Tom Kitwitz. I want to recognize and honor all of you on the call that you're all going to get an honorary doctorate from David Troxel today, and physician as a physician of the human spirit. And finally, here are my contact information. If you look on that bottom right there, sort of in the middle, A Dignified Life is my family book for families, very inexpensive. You can get it on Amazon. The Best Friends Approach to Dementia Care is our second edition of our professional book on how you create a Best Friends program. And if you put David Troxel in Amazon, you'll see all these books. My activity books, we've written two, I think, very good books on all sorts of things you can do with people with dementia. They're often very nicely discounted on Amazon. You can like the Best Friends Approach on Facebook. And also there's my email, very simple, davidtroxel@gmail.com. Always happy to answer some questions. I think I'm going to just move here forward and go to their last slide right here. Lauren, thank you so much. Patty, thank you so much. It's great to be with Alzheimer's Orange County and to do this presentation. And now the floor is open for questions and discussion. We've got about 10 minutes or so.
Yes, thank you so much, David. Such valuable information and such a wonderful topic. So if you have any questions for David, please be sure to type them into the chat box in the control panel. We do have a couple questions already, but before we begin the Q&A session, if we do run past 12 o'clock, you're welcome to remain online to ask your questions or listen to the answers. But if you need to leave the webinar, you can. Just remember that if you want to earn CE credit, you need to be online for the full 60 minutes. Again, I want to take this time to thank our sponsors once more for making this presentation possible. We're so grateful for the support of O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, and Caring Companions at Home. One last thing, next month's free webinar is on August 13th with the topic of Parkinson's disease, communication, and speech challenges. Okay, so now let's get into our questions for David. David, how much research is being done on people with gabapentin for pain and bladder control drugs and acid reflux drugs contributing to dementia?
Well, Lauren, gabapentin is an anticonvulsant and a nerve pain medication. And I have to just own up that I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I think that I'm not aware of any research that talks about cognitive loss with this medication, but I guess I'd refer them to the to the drug company's webpage and to their doctors. So sorry, but that first question I can't be very, very helpful. It could be just anecdotal, but there could be something there as well. So good catch and something to be aware of.
Okay. Someone's asking for the slide for your books again.
Okay, let me just go back here. Oops. Okay, here we go.
Perfect.
And again, if you probably put David Troxel under Amazon, you can see all these. The one on the right is my professional edition on how to really design a best friends program. The little one, Dignified Life for Families. And then I'd recommend the two activity books. We actually have a brand new book coming out in about 4 weeks called The Best Friends Staff, Learning to Deliver Exceptional Dementia Care. That will be for programs and really how to teach about dementia and how to create a good culture of care.
Okay. When people, either the person with cognitive issues or family members, are in denial over the situation, do you try to help them move beyond denial? And if so, how do you approach them?
Okay, well, a couple of thoughts I have. One is that for family members, because sometimes brothers and sisters don't agree. I'm a big fan of what they call neuropsychological testing. So you probably have all seen this in the movies or documentaries, but where they say to somebody, "I'm going to give you 4 words and repeat them back to me," or draw a clock face and put 10 after 2, or name as many animals as you can in the zoo. So a neuropsychologist will give someone a formal evaluation. My mother had one, it was about an hour and a half. Medicare covers it. And then the doctor will write, the psychologist or doctor will write a report and say, your mother presented as a charming, lovely lady from England. She said she was 45, not 85. She did this, did that. And I think a letter like that can be something shown to the family that can be very powerful, because it's not me just saying, I think something's going on, but a professional weighing in. When the person's in denial, there are people who just have no awareness of their dementia. And I think in that case, you might you might have to finesse it in a different way. Mom, I worry so much about you falling in a parking lot. I don't really want you driving by yourself because I'm so worried that we all get a bit fragile as we get older, and I don't want you to get to have a fall. So you have to sometimes save face. I'd certainly start with honesty and let them know what's happening. But because of their judgment changing with dementia and their short-term forgetfulness, you often have to have a softer approach. You can't just convince somebody they've got a problem. Often they're in great denial. Emotive arguments, concern, showing your emotions, your concern, more powerful than a PowerPoint you show your mom.
Okay, thank you. What are the statistics on Alzheimer's disease in the US versus Asia and Europe? That's a tricky one.
Great question. As far as I know, when you look at the sort of epidemiology of Alzheimer's, as far as I know, it's kind of the same everywhere. There are certain countries that say they have less, like, in East India or India, Pakistan. And one theory there, by the way, is they eat a lot of curry. And what's in curry? Turmeric, which is a natural, powerful antioxidant. Um, so ultimately, I think the numbers are fairly similar, and/or the problem is we can't trust the numbers that are there. Again, Alzheimer's International would tell you more. There is some profound good news, I guess. The overall kind of incidence of Alzheimer's, the number of cases, is actually kind of going down a little bit, because I think of early childhood education around the world. There's evidence that early childhood education can help us build up a cognitive reserve that can carry us later into life. So the raw numbers of Alzheimer's are going down. The problem is the aging population is going up. So the percentages are good, but the total number is still bad. But yeah, we don't really have good data, but I think it's pretty similar. And of course, age-related issues, number one.
Okay. Um, what do you say to families that do not want to tell their loved one of their diagnosis or to mention memory loss?
You know, it's it, Lauren, this is such a really interesting question. I'll be really direct that usually it's the family's hang up and the family's issue more than the person. And I've been in those conversations in England, around the world, in the US, with my own friends. And often when you talk to somebody about it or let them know the doctor's giving them this diagnosis, they say, well, of course, I know I've had this problem. Or it goes in one ear and out the other, and they kind of forget about it. So I'm a fan of letting people know what's up, doing it in a gentle way, because otherwise it gets very hard to utilize services and get in-home help and all of that. But in general, people are so fearful about telling people. I've rarely had a major catastrophe or problem with someone being told the truth, particularly when you do it in a loving way. With my mom, when Dr. Harbaugh told her diagnosis, my father and I were there. He said, welcome to the memory loss club, Dorothy. A third of the people your age have this problem. I want you to live every day and have fun and go to Nordstrom's and spend a lot of your husband's money. So my father did not like that advice, but otherwise, she kind of left feeling okay.
Yes. Um, is it healthy for the mind if my dad counts his money for over 3 hours? We have a stack of notes and it keeps him busy, but sometimes he remembers that he needs to go to the bank and demands to go. And it seems like the counting money gets him hyper. If we put the money away, he will just sit and watch TV all day. So, which one is more healthy?
Wow, these are great questions.
Hmm.
I think we all have a need to be needed, a need to be purposeful. And of course, money is something a lot of people fixate on, right? Particularly older people who maybe didn't remember a time when, the depression was there, they didn't have the money. I think it's fine that he likes to count his money. What I'd say is maybe think about some other things similar, like I said earlier, I mentioned my friend who bought a set of poker chips at a garage sale and will accidentally spill them and ask his father to put them together by color. Maybe checking a deck of cards to see if all the cards are there, the 52 cards. Maybe some simple math ledgers or books that he can help with, things like that, or sorting, organizing things. It sounds silly, but I know in some senior living places, people will fold towels or even put socks together, things like that. And you want to say, Dad, I'm running so behind. Would you help me? I could sure use your help. And that makes it better. But I think if it doesn't send him into some, negative point about not having enough money or whatever, I think the activity is fine.
Wonderful. Um, does the research and skills apply to early onset dementia and Alzheimer's?
If I understand the question correctly, I'd say probably it's even more important to be engaged in life. There's something we didn't talk about today called mild cognitive impairment, MCI, where people are doing pretty well, but maybe have a few deficits. Like maybe Lauren, we're out to dinner and I ask you 4 times, do you have any children? I keep asking the same question, but I found my way to the restaurant. I pay with my credit card, I add up the 18% tip, but you're having certain deficits, right? I think for those people, you want to absolutely have a good diet, exercise, be engaged, be social. A physician diagnosing MCI should say, live your life. So I think early stage, you actually have a better chance of hopefully pushing this disease off a few years if you change your lifestyle.
Okay, perfect. A couple more questions. How do you use someone's life story when they are at the end stage of their disease and unable to communicate?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. Well, I think even when, the person seemingly can't communicate, I think it's so powerful to talk with them and maybe share your appreciation for the things they've done, the accomplishments they've done. Maybe your mother always loved a certain kind of perfume that you might want to spray on her. Maybe they always loved Dolly Parton, put on Dolly Parton on the music, in your smart speaker or, your CD player. um, any old traditions, favorite foods if they're still able to eat. If they love gardening, get them outside. So you're right that it's not maybe quite as direct an approach, but I think I would still try to at least speak with them about their past and share some of these good memories. And maybe they're hopefully hearing some of it even late in their life.
Okay. And then last question, how can you gently educate families to not quiz their loved ones?
So, as a professional, one of my little finesses, I'm revealing my secrets here, Lauren, on this webinar, but I'll sometimes say to like maybe I'm observing someone like this daughter who I mentioned earlier, like, hey, mom, what's my name? Now, depending on the situation, I won't necessarily walk up to her and correct her, but I might say, is it okay if I sit with you for a minute and tell you something I observed? And what I'll sometimes say is, I used to do that with my mother, or I used to make, when I started off my career, I was sometimes, feel like I could, use reality orientation. And it didn't really work well for me. And I just want to share with you that, perhaps for your mother, dot, dot, dot. So kind of almost not saying bad caregiver, you did a
Hmm.
bad thing, because God knows I made plenty of mistakes, and with my mom and dad, and none of us are perfect. But I might just share with them that, hey, kind of a best practice is this, or consensus is this, or research suggests that. I will say that in general, just for those of you who are maybe taking your first class today, wonderful, because I think the more we know, the better. There is a right way and a wrong way to do it. So to be a caregiver. So yeah, brochures. If you go on the web, there's some great materials you can download and print to share. And again, hey sis, this one handout helped me so much. It helped me so much. I'd love for you to read it and let's talk about it. So that's the kind. I a little bit more of a subtle approach.
Okay. We actually got one more question. And it's a good one. What should I do in a situation where a participant of mine has made up stories about another participant, so mostly discriminatory, physical altercations, etc., that aren't true, at my daycare? It has been difficult for my staff, and redirecting this participant might make it worse if we don't correct. So, do you agree with our approach of redirection, or is there another suggestion?
Wow, a good one. So a couple of things come to mind here. This word I mentioned, delusion. That one participant might feel that that other participant maybe owes him $20,000 and never paid him back, or that he, belongs to organized crime or whatever. Sometimes people kind of develop these delusions, and so I would definitely develop a script, about that. Like, hey George, I know you're afraid that David belongs to organized crime, but we've checked him out, and guess what? He's on the up and up. He's on the up and up where everything's good. So developing some kind of script like that can be very, very helpful. There's another fun word, I actually did a blog on it a few years ago, confabulation, where people kind of make up all these stories. That's a great word, confabulation, where they make up stories to kind of fill in missing pieces of information. They're not deliberately lying, but they're just trying to put it all together. So I guess what I'd say is, I think certainly even in a senior living and day centers, sometimes, two people begin to have some conflict. I would say try to keep them separate. develop some common language. You know, you know, that Mike, he has quite a sense of humor, but let's put that one to bed, or something like that, to kind of, if the staff get really stressed out by it, the other participants at the day center will feel their stress. So do your best to manage it that way. Obviously, you don't want someone who's being abusive and racist or whatever. It's a tough thing because people become disinhibited, they lose their filters. So again, if you can separate them somehow, that might be very helpful.
Mhm. Trial and error until you find the right thing and then consistent
Right,
with that
right.
script.
And
Mhm.
and with the one person you're trying to redirect, this is actually a really good point, I think, very late in our class today, is don't redirect them with just like, a cookie or a candy bar. Redirect them with something more purpose. Hey, Joanna, I know you won a prize for your famous pumpkin cheesecake. Would you teach me how to make the pumpkin cheesecake? So something focused about their talent. Or, hey, I know you love animals, or I know you loved antiques. How about I put on that famous show Antique Roadshow you love so much? We'll put that on the television on streaming so you can watch your favorite show. So you want to redirect them with something more connected to who they are versus just come and have an ice cream.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. This brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you so much to our presenter, David Troxel, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us.